my great fears are about, for example, West Bank annexation. I guess this is a good way to transition to talking about that because that's Miriam Adelson's desire. That's why she gave Trump that $100 million. She was open about it. I mean, in her speech at that fundraiser in Bedminster, New Jersey, she was saying, "Oh, I didn't even ask for the Golan Heights, and he gave it to me as a goodie, basically, last time around." It's not being reported very much, but Israel's violence in the West Bank has been escalating as the ceasefire has been tepidly holding in Gaza. What is your analysis of that dynamic?
Well, it's very clear based on statements made by senior Israeli officials that as a condition for agreeing to, I would call it a temporary ceasefire in Gaza, that they would be given the green light by the Trump administration to wage an all-out war in the West Bank, especially the northern West Bank, especially Jenin, especially the Jenin refugee camp. But you can expect that this will expand to Tulkarem, to the Nord Shams refugee camp, to Nablus, really pretty much everywhere in the West Bank. We're seeing Israeli military operations like we've never seen before. Really, I mean, I can't recall the last time we saw the kind of operation we've seen. Must have been probably 2002 in Jenin, when the Israeli military entered the Jenin refugee camp, going door to door and slaughtered dozens of Palestinians back in 2002 in that campaign. And we're seeing something similar now with the Israeli military entering the camp, ripping up all the roads. By the way, they did this already in July, so this is nothing fundamentally new. But it's very clear that this is a very targeted, a systematic campaign of rooting out Palestinian militant resistance in the West Bank. And it's having extreme consequences for the civilian population of the West Bank. They've increased the number of checkpoints and roadblocks in the West Bank from about 600 before October 7th. Now I think we're now up to about 900 or 1,000. They've imposed total lockdowns pretty much everywhere in the West Bank. You cannot go from Ramallah to Nablus. You cannot go from Jenin to Tulkarem. There are roadblocks and checkpoints preventing Palestinians from leaving their towns, cities, and refugee camps. We've also seen in recent months the Israeli military now using air power. Now, Hellfire missiles being used in the West Bank. New military tactics, new military strategies. So it's a very, very worrying situation. And look,
can you talk a little bit more about that, Zach? Like that being such an escalation, because people that may not be as familiar with the distinction between like the West Bank and Gaza, Gaza's bombed all the time. The West Bank is bombed occasionally, but it's mostly this rolling violence and seizure of land and vigilantes and IDF people shooting people and killing them in a more targeted way.
The West Bank is divided into three areas. These three areas being Area A, B, and C as a result of the Oslo process. In Area C, which has about 150,000 Palestinians, Israeli soldiers and Israeli settlers have been terrorizing Palestinians on a daily basis for decades. And it's been ramping up in the past year. We've seen dozens, I think 24 communities uprooted and ethnically cleansed, primarily from Area C. We're talking more than 1,500 Palestinians ethnically cleansed from Area C in just the past 15 and a half months. Then you have Area B, places like Sebastia in the West Bank, which are now also increasingly coming under threat. We're talking about how many Palestinians in Area B? About 500,000. They're also now facing, these are the sort of semi-rural, small towns of the West Bank. They've been facing increasing attacks by settlers. And now, Area A, the area with the overwhelming majority of the population of the West Bank, the urban centers, Ramallah, Beit Lahem, Nablus, Jenin, Tulkarem, Hebron, Khalid, these areas are now facing a new level of violence, a level of violence that Palestinians in these areas have not seen in decades. These are areas like Jenin and Nablus, where the Israeli military is sending we're talking thousands of Israeli soldiers on the ground, ripping up streets, tearing up civilian infrastructure, destroying the water infrastructure, destroying hundreds of homes, destroying roads, destroying hospitals. In January, just last month, the Israeli military entered a hospital. I believe was it in Jenin, and killed 3 Palestinians. So these are undercover operations taken, carried out by the Israeli military in civilian areas, dressed up as Palestinian civilians, carrying out the crime of perfidy in international law, which is feigning status as a civilian during armed hostilities in order to kill Palestinians. They're doing it in the West Bank. They've been doing it in Gaza, by the way, as well. Recall that in the Nusayrat refugee camp in this past summer, when the when the Israeli military entered that refugee camp to rescue 4 Israeli hostages, they killed 274 Palestinians at the same time. And it was during that operation where they feigned status as both Palestinian civilians and as Palestinian aid workers. And so they're doing that in Gaza, they're doing that in the West Bank as well. It's a very frightening time right now for everyone in the West Bank. Not only because they're dramatically expanding the military campaigns in the West Bank, both in the tactics and in the methods and in the strategies in area A, B, and C, as we already said. But we're also now getting a confirmation that the plan really is annexation. I mean, we've known this all along, but if you follow the reports of B'Tselem and if you follow the reports of Peace Now, every week, every month, the Israeli civilian administration takes another step. And people think annexation is like one day it's not annexed, the next day it is. That's not how it works.
Right.
It's an incremental process. Every week, every month, there's a new policy, a new regulation, which gradually incorporates the West Bank into the Israeli civilian administration.
And it was announced this morning that the Israeli military has been told by higher-ups to begin to plan to remove those remaining Palestinians from Gaza, and what that removal looks like is going to be incredibly violent. Can you react, I guess, to that instruction and give us some historical context about how many times Israel has tried to ethnically cleanse Gaza and they've failed? So, bad record.
Well, first of all, what we hear and what we see from Gaza is that Palestinians have no intent on leaving. Yep. And so any kind of relocation effort is going to be forcible. It's not going to be voluntary. And Israel always blurs the lines between forced relocation and voluntary relocation. They force Palestinians historically, as you pointed out. Israel has attempted to relocate, i.e. ethnically cleanse Palestinians from Gaza on countless occasions. They tried to do it in 1948. It was through American pressure. 1948, it was through American pressure. The American most senior diplomat lived in Israel at the time told the Israeli military, this is the end of the war in late 48, early 1949. No, you're going to withdraw your troops from Gaza Strip and Sinai now. And it was only because of that American pressure in 1948-49 that Gaza wound up in the hands of Egypt rather than Israel. And then in 56, when Israel reinvaded the Gaza Strip, they went on a campaign. They slaughtered 150 Palestinians in Khan Yunis. They slaughtered another 100 in Rafah with the goal to incentivize flight. The same thinking that they adopted in 48 was you slaughter a few hundred here, incentivize the rest to leave. They did the same thing in 56, except 56 was not 48, and the Palestinians did not leave. Only about 1,000 left after those massacres. And then when the Israeli prime minister at the time realized he could not compel Palestinians to leave by force, they started to develop plans to figure out ways of ridding Gaza of its Palestinian refugees. When they reoccupied Gaza in 1967, they did the same thing. They developed a plan to ethnically cleanse Gaza. And this was at the highest levels. The Israeli cabinet met on June 18th and June 19th, 1967. They made a few decisions, one of which was we will annex Gaza after we're able to rid the population of most of its refugees. That was the decision made in June 1967, a week after Israel conquered that territory. And then from the period June 1967 to December 1967, Israel settled on a plan to depopulate the Strip. And basically from January from the end of the war in 1967 until about the end of 1969, 1970, Israel compelled 70,000 Palestinians in Gaza to leave. And then from 1970 to 1972, Israel realized they weren't going to be able to compel more than that by through these incentive programs. And so they did it by force. And Ariel Sharon enters the Gaza Strip in 1971 with a plan to, quote unquote, thin out the Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip. They enter the refugee. They first enter Jabalia in 1971. They displace hundreds of families. They expel 12,000 Palestinian family members of fighters. So these are innocent civilians by Israel's own admission. They expel them to Sinai. They continue in 1972. They try more attempts in 1974 and 1976. But the whole plan all along, well into the 1990s, is to rid Gaza of its refugees. Anyone who leaves the Gaza Strip or the West Bank for more than 3 years is not able to return. They lose their residency rights. Israel has been in a constant effort over the past 56 years in Gaza and the West Bank to figure out ways of getting them out, of pushing them out, because Zionism is a political philosophy that says, how do we create a Jewish state in a land that's mostly non-Jewish? How do we create Jewish domination and Jewish control in a land that is mostly non-Jewish? Well, the easiest way of doing it is just getting rid of all those non-Jews.
By killing or by forcible transfer. And that is what Zionism is, folks. And I think people are starting to wake up to the contradictions of what liberal Zionism is and what we need to do. Although we still need one, and I was saying this before the show, the evolution in this conversation is an endorsement of a one democratic state from the river to the sea. And we have still yet to see a politician in this country make that case, even the good ones that are standing up for against genocide. That is what our solution, the solution needs to be, like South Africa. It must be imposed upon them.
One person, one vote to the United States of America is a great idea in the US. In South Africa, it's a great idea, apparently in every country in the world except for one. There's only one country in the world where the United States apparently believes that one person should not equal one vote, and that's the state of Israel, where you have 3.5 million Palestinians in the West Bank, and you have 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, so you're talking about 5.5 million Palestinians who are apparently not real people. They don't deserve a vote.
They don't get to govern themselves. We get to decide who governs them. I mean, we get to decide who's going to be the governing authority, apparently, of Gaza. That was consistent with Biden and is consistent with Trump. They're too savage to govern themselves. Don't you understand, Zach? So it's remarkable just seeing President Trump refer to the destruction of Gaza. It's a demolition site in front of the person sitting 1 foot, 2 feet away from the person who made it a demolition site with U.S. weapons. Yep.
It's just, you're talking about the destruction of Gaza in the abstract, using the passive voice with the person who destroyed it sitting in front of you. It's a level of gaslighting and shameful behavior that I honestly just cannot recall any American president doing that kind of thing really in my lifetime.
Yeah, I guess the rule of thumb is that if there's a new low, Trump's gonna sink to it and create a new standard, within the next few days or something like that. But Zachary Foster, everybody, please check out Palestine Nexus, the newsletter. As you can hear, Zachary has done so much great work in archiving this history that, frankly, through genocide, the Israeli government is trying to erase. So I really appreciate your work, and thanks for coming on today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.